me get situated here. Gotta get everything. I haven't downloaded my notes yet. All right, we are in Acts chapter 23 this morning. Acts 23. So if we remember, we started last week, we looked at how Paul was now standing before the Sanhedrin. And so he had been released from his bonds with the commander, but the commander brought him down to the Sanhedrin to then try to figure out and try to understand what was going on and why they were so upset with Paul. Because we've had two mobs, I guess you could just say it, had happened already right now, and so we're going to see another one here in a minute. But he's wanting to know what's going on, what the problem is. And so that we finished up in verse 5 when it says, "And Paul said, 'I do not know, brethren, he was a high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of the rule of your people.' But when Paul perceived," and that's verse 6 is where we're starting now, Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees. He cried out in the council, 'Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and the resurrection of the dead, I am being judged.'" Now, Paul is being smart here because they're already a mob. They're already upset with him. And nothing really is going to go well with this. I mean, the commander's trying to meet with, who he's meeting with now is not the people. He's meeting with the Sanhedrin. So this would be the leaders. This would be the high priest that he is standing in front of. They're still upset. So Paul looks around and he goes, "I can take the heat off me." And so he says, "I am a Pharisee, and concerning the hope and the resurrection of the dead, I am being judged." So he then uses that to really cause a anger between them two. And so what does it do? Verse 7, "And when we had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, no angel or spirit, but the Pharisees confess both." So the problem with Pharisees and Sadducees is the Sadducees do not believe in the resurrection. But if you notice here, it doesn't say just the resurrection. What else do they not believe in? Angels and the spirit, which would be, I think, in reference to the personal spirit that you and I have, a soul. And which it's just really crazy to me to think about that, because they're basically stating that they don't believe in the spiritual realm. But they do, right? Because who do they believe in? They believe there's God, right? They can't see God. They understand that. So, but they don't believe in the spiritual realm. So it just doesn't make any sense. And so this has been a thing for years. This is a sect of the Jews that have done this. But somebody read Matthew 22 and verse 23.
"The same day Sadducees came to him who say that there is no resurrection, and they asked him a question."
All right, so this is during Jesus' time, and his dealing with them, and they didn't believe in the resurrection, and so they asked the question, what the following verses is, what about someone that's been married several times, and her husband has died? She's had several husbands because they've all died. Who's she going to be married to in heaven? And so Jesus deals with that there. But the Sadducees have thought this way for a long time, and if they believe that there is no resurrection, then what are they going to have a problem with when Paul is teaching? What is one part of the gospel? Somebody read 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 16. All right, so in the context, Paul dealing there with the resurrection states, if you don't believe in the resurrection, then Christ is not risen. So when Paul is going around and saying that Christ is risen, that he is a witness of him being resurrected, the Sadducees are going to get angry because they don't believe in a resurrection. When they knew Christ died, they believe that he's still in the grave. What did Brad talk about? What was the story behind what happened to Jesus' body that the Jews put out? That he was stolen. And they believe that to this day still. That was stated in Matthew 28, or the end of chapter 27, that's what they were going to do. They paid the guards and said, go tell everybody that the disciples took the body. And then when Brad was here, if you notice, he had one of the writers that he referenced from that time said that's what happened. And so obviously the Sadducees don't want to believe that Jesus is risen. And so they're going to have a problem with that. So when Paul says there that he is, the thing that he is being judged for is that hope in the resurrection of the dead, he's right. The Sadducees had a problem with that. And so, think about, somebody read Acts 17, verse 31 and 32.
Because he has fixed the day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has been given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. Now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, we will hear you again about this.
Okay, so he had problems with Jews and Gentiles that did not believe in the resurrection. So he is telling the truth and that he is being judged upon that statement. But what were they really upset with in the beginning with Paul here? Was it because he was teaching the resurrection? No, it was because he was teaching against the law. He was teaching in their minds that their customs and things like that. That's what they were angry for. Yet Paul knew if he brought this subject up in the Sanhedrin, they would start to argue, and they did. So he causes a division. He causes a argument that takes the heat off of him, and even to the point, if you look at verse 9, it says, and there arose a loud outcry, and the scribes of the Pharisees party arose and protested, saying, we find no evil in this man. For as a spirit or an angel had spoken to him, let us not fight against God. So he has the Pharisees and the Sadducees mad at him. They want him dead. When he states this, then the Pharisees start saying, well, we're with him. And so now he's protected in a sense, because the Pharisees are going, you know what, he is innocent. Because if an angel told him this, or a spirit, then obviously it's fine. That's kind of a crazy way of thinking that Paul is right, because we have passages that tell us in Galatians, if even an angel from heaven came down and told you something different, then not to listen to him. Here they're saying, well, if an angel told him this, then he's fine. So the thing is, when I think about this, was Paul wrong in causing this uprising? Yeah, I think it's wisdom here. He was stating what was true. They did judge him for that. They were upset with how he taught about the resurrection. He's trying to defend his life, right? He's already been a part of 2 mobs that wanted to kill him. Could happen again. No. I agree. I don't think they're going to listen to him anyways. And so I think he was doing the right thing here, using wisdom and seeing how he could change this mob around to not be killed. And so notice then verse 10. Actually, verse 9, I want to notice a couple things there. The Pharisees that were against him are now standing with him. What does that say about their integrity towards the law or integrity? Yeah, they're very wishy-washy, right? So they were upset with Paul until it came to something that they were very prideful about, and they saw that they had an advantage over the Sadducees, and so now they want to stand up and say, well, he is fine, he's right. So they're very wishy-washy. Their pride's coming through here. And so it's just interesting to notice they're changing. So then verse 10 says, now when there arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and bring him into the barracks. And so the commander here saw what was going on and that there was another mob getting ready to start. And so he orders Paul to be brought back to the barracks. Now, is Paul being arrested? What is his concern? He's going to get pulled to pieces. He's going to get killed. Why would that be important to him now? Paul's a Roman citizen. He now will be responsible if Paul dies. Because of him being a Roman citizen, he's going to have to answer for that. And so he's going to make sure that Paul is protected. And so he's not taking him to be arrested, but he's taking him to be for safety. And so notice verse 11. It says, but the following night the Lord stood by him and said, be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome. So Paul here is now divinely being told, this is Jesus again speaking to him in a vision. It could be a vision, it doesn't say that, it just says that the Lord stood by him. And so Jesus could have appeared right there to him again and spoke to him. And he says that he will, in a sense, divinely, he is going to go to Rome. That's pretty good assurance to Paul. If the Lord is saying you're going to Rome, he's going. And Paul's always wanted to go to Rome, right? Somebody read Romans 1, 9 through 12. All right, so here Paul is, when he wrote to the Romans, which was before this point, he stated that he desired to go to them. So some would say, well, maybe he was discouraged because he wanted to go to Rome so bad that at this point he's thinking about how his life is almost gone in 2 different times, almost a third time. He's discouraged. And notice what Jesus says here, be of good cheer, Paul. Why would he say that? Well, he's discouraged. He's had his life almost taken from him 3 times here at Jerusalem, and that's going to get anybody down. It's going to get anybody a little disappointed or upset or depressed in a sense of what's going on. And so here Christ is encouraging him. He's saying, all of this that's going on, you're not going to die here, Paul. He doesn't say he's not going to die in Rome, but by saying you're going to Rome, he knows he's not going to die there in Jerusalem at that point. And so Paul then is told that he will be a witness like he was in Jerusalem to those in Rome. He's going to take the gospel to many people. And when Paul's in Rome, of course, we know that he wrote several prison epistles to Timothy and to others, and Titus. And so we have a lot of good things that happened with Paul being there in Rome. All right, so that brings us to verse 12. Somebody want to read verse 12 through verse 22, please?
When
Okay.
it was day, the
strictly bound ourselves by an oath to taste no food till we have killed Paul. Now therefore you, along with the council, give notice to the tribune to bring him down to you, as though you were going to determine his case more exactly, and we are ready to kill him before he comes near.
Now, now the son of Paul's sister heard of their ambush, so he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Paul called one of the centurions and said, "Take this young man to the tribune, for he has something to tell him." So he took him and brought him to the tribune and said, "Paul the prisoner called me and asked me to bring this young man to you, as he has something to say to you." The tribune took him by the hand and going aside asked him privately, "What is it that you have to tell me?" And he said, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they are going to inquire somewhat more closely about him. But do not be persuaded by them, for more than 40 of their men are lying in ambush for him, who have bound themselves by an oath neither to eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, waiting for your consent." So the tribune dismissed the young man, charging him, "Tell no one that you have informed me of these things."
All right, so verse 12 says, "And when it was day, some of the Jews here, they have now bound together, they've made an oath that they're not going to eat or drink until Paul is dead, until he's been killed." And so it says around 40. This would have included, probably a good chunk of the Sadducees who then were upset that we just talked about. Maybe they got some of their fellow people, their brethren, to get angry with Paul. And so we have 40 of them that want Paul dead and not going to eat or drink for a while. Do you think they had to break that oath at one point? Yeah. That oath would not be able to, they're not going to be able to fulfill their oath. And so here they waited, and they're going to wait. Notice verse 14. It says, they came to the chief priests and elders, said, "We have bound ourselves under a great oath that we will eat nothing until we have killed Paul." There's the plot. The plot is that they're going to tell the council, or tell the commander that the council would like to question Paul some more, and they'd bring Paul down. Now, it's interesting, this plot, because they're going, where do they go to talk to these chief priests and elders? It doesn't say there, does it? It says they just came to the chief priests and elders. So the chief priests and elders, this would have been at the temple. This would have been where they would meet and judge, and that's where Paul was taken earlier. But notice they go and they talk to these men, and these men don't even stop them. They don't say, "Yeah, that's not a good idea, we're not going to do that." They help them, which is interesting, because they wanted Paul killed, but they didn't have a problem with it. So they were fine with being co-conspirators in this. Is that any different than what they did for Christ? Same thing, right? They then got witnesses that were lying to come and stand before them about Christ, and Christ was killed out of this court. Same thing is going on with Paul. Just terrible. These were supposed to be the leaders, the men and the leaders of that time, who were people they looked up to. They were the ones that they were the teachers and things like that. They cared nothing about people anymore. They cared nothing about the law. They cared only about their power and their emotions here.
Who's you in verse 15? Now you.
Verse 15, that is the conspirators, the 40, saying to the chief priests and the elders. Yeah, so that's verse 15. It says, "Now you therefore, together with the council." So they're saying, we're going to kill him, but we want you to tell the commander we want to see him again, or you want to see him again. And then on the way, when the commander is bringing him, they're going to jump him and kill him. So if they're going to jump Paul is being protected by Roman soldiers. What's going to happen to possibly some of those Roman soldiers? Yeah, they're going to die trying to protect Paul because he's under their care. So these Jews are not only going to kill Paul, they're going to kill some Roman soldiers. Is that going to be good for them? They're not going to have a chance to eat anyways after this oath is fulfilled because they're going to get killed. And so they're really putting their death sentence, they're signing their death certificate in a sense by doing this. And so verse 16, it says, so when Paul's sister's son, which a better way to say that is his nephew, so Paul's nephew, I don't know why it says that, heard of the ambush, he went, entered the barracks, and told Paul. We're not told anything about this nephew. We're not told anything else about Paul's sister. We're not really given any more information about any of his family, honestly, except for his parents earlier when we were introduced to him. But we know that he has a sister. She must have lived here in Jerusalem. And so this nephew, he is hearing what's going on, and he goes and tells to Paul. So verse 17, he enters the barracks, verse 16. Then Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, take this young man to the commander, for he has something to tell him. Notice about Paul here. We talked about how he wasn't arrested, right? So he's free to really move around the barracks, the castle. People are coming and visiting him. He's just there for protection at this point. And he is honestly either just, I don't think he's arrested. I don't think he's in a jail cell or anything. But they were trying to protect Paul. He's in protective custody. He's not allowed to leave, but he's able to freely move around and do things and have people come visit him. Yeah. And so then verse 17, then Paul called for that centurion. The centurion took the man to the commander. Verse 18, so he took him, brought him to the commander, and said, Paul the prisoner called me to him and asked me to bring this young man to me. He has something to tell you. And so what does he do? He tells him exactly what is going to happen. These 40 men must not have been quiet about what they were going to do. Or this nephew was in that kind of inner circle of these Jews that were doing this and heard about it and was not going to be involved and left. But he knew every detail. Probably, I would say. We're not told, but I would say he probably is. No, probably not. That's a good point. I didn't think about that. Yeah, he's probably a young person. And so, here he tells him everything, all the way down to the oath. And not only that, notice he tells the commander that they were going to call for you and lie to you. So the commander, think about this commander here. He's not only hearing that they're going to jump Paul, maybe kill some of his soldiers, but these chief priests and elders who he is there really to protect also. The castle, remember, is outside of the temple. And so anytime there was a disruption, they would come and they would take care of the problem. So they would be then protecting the chief priests and the elders, those at the high level men at that time. Those men who have been protected by him are now lying to him and trying to deceive him. That's going to strain their relationship, I think, from this point forward. Because, he's now, the people that he's protected, they're now lying to him. And so I would not be very happy at this point. And so then at the end there, it says, verse 22, so the commander let the young man depart, and he commanded him, tell no one that you have revealed these things to me. And so he says, don't tell anybody. He's going to deal with this. And that's verse 23. And so verse 23 and 24 says, then he called for 2 centurions, saying, prepare 200 soldiers 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. If you add that up, that's 470 soldiers. That's a lot. You have 470 versus 40. Why do you think he had so many go?
To completely squish whatever they might come against.
Yeah. If you have this massive army of men moving, these 40 men they're gonna see that, and they're gonna be a little unlikely to want to jump him, because they're gonna be overpowered very easily.
Well, the 40 could have tried to gather it more.
Exactly.
No.
They wouldn't know. If there's 40, around 40 at that point, like you said, they could be talking, this is gonna be the next day, they could have got more people. What usually happens with a mob? It grows.
But they wouldn't be equipped to deal with 70 trained soldiers,
No.
Roman soldiers at that.
Not at all.
Well armed versus a mob, I mean,
Yep.
regardless of what.
But even if they 10x and went to 400 conspirators against 470 professional soldiers, they still wouldn't have a chance.
Nope, they wouldn't. I mean, they'd have the element of surprise. They would have the element of surprise if they didn't know. But yeah, exactly. So he's definitely making sure that Paul is being protected here.
And what's the 3rd hour of the night?
So the 3rd hour of night would be 9 p.m. So remember, their time started at 6. So 6 p.m. was the start of the next day. So the 3rd hour would have been that point. And so here, it's about 9 p.m. in the evening. They're doing this in secrecy. You know, these 40 men plus that are upset, they're not prepared for these soldiers to move Paul. So they would have been surprised. They wouldn't have been organized. They wouldn't have been ready. So it's a good choice by this commander to do this, to get Paul out of the city. And so verse 24 says, and provided mounts to set Paul on and bring him safely to Felix the governor. That means he's riding a horse. He's also going with these horsemen. And so verse 25, he writes this letter in the following manner. Claudius Lysias, which is him, we've talked about his name before, to the most excellent governor Felix. And so Felix, let's talk about Felix for a minute. Felix, so they're going to Caesarea. This is about 60 miles away. Felix is the governor of Judea. Now, Barnes states this is just a good summation of who Felix is. His name was Antonius Felix. He was the freedman of Antonia, the mother of the emperor Claudius. He was high in the favor of Claudius and was made by him governor of Judea. Josephus calls him Claudius Felix. He had married 3 wives in succession that were of royal families, one of whom was Drusilla, which we've talked about her before, afterward mentioned in Acts 24, verse 24, who was sister to King Agrippa. Tacitus says that he governed with all the authority of a king and the baseness and insolence of a slave. He was an unrighteous governor, a base mercenary, and a bad man. He really didn't serve for very long. If I remember right, from about 52 to 59 AD. And so he was removed from his position because, according to history, he was violent in his interactions between the Jews and the Gentiles, and they're fighting here. And that in Acts chapter 24, verse 27, we're told that he is replaced by Festus. And so that's later on, next chapter. And so if we notice here, Paul is now on this horse. He is headed towards the city of Caesarea, and he's going to be with these soldiers all the way, the horsemen. We're going to see the foot soldiers are going to stop, and they're going to go back after a certain point. But let's read this letter. And so Lysias says this, to the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. Coming with the troops, I rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman. Stop right there. Is he telling the truth? Partly, right? Did he end up protecting Paul Ultimately, yes. But he says here, I learned that he was a Roman, so I went and I rescued him. That was not how it happened, was it? He found Paul being beaten, didn't know who he was. He thought he was one of the people that went out into the wilderness and tried to kill a bunch of Romans. Later, he finds out he's a Roman. Then he starts to protect him. And so he's bending the truth here. He's trying to make himself look better to Felix, because Felix is over him. And then verse 28 says, and when I wanted to know the reason they accused him, I brought him before their council. I found out that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but had nothing charged against him deserving of death or chains. Notice that. He is still perplexed on why they want Paul killed. He's saying, yeah, he may have done something against their law, but they don't have anything criminal against him. He's still trying to figure out why they want to kill him, because in his mind, he has not done anything wrong. So verse 30, and when it was told to me that the Jews lay in wait for the man, I sent him immediately to you, and also commanded his accusers to state before you the charges against him. Farewell. Now, why would it be smart to take him and take him to Caesarea? So Caesarea is right, if you're looking at the map here. Caesarea, here's Jerusalem, 60 miles away of Caesarea. Why would you think it'd be important to get Paul out of here and take him up here?
Don't fit up the chain, somebody else goes.
Okay. Felix, of course, he's the governor. We're going to find out he's the governor of Judea, but he also had control of Cilicia up here. So, yeah, he's taking it up the chain. He's taking it to somebody else to deal with it. But also, Caesarea is a Gentile city. And so, there was a lot of Jews that lived there. At one point, Israel owned this area, but Caesarea was a lot less Jews there. So Paul's going to be a lot more safe there. In the fact of also Felix being there, that's going to be important too. And so he tells him, sends this letter in the hands of Paul. And so then notice verse 31. It says, and the soldiers, as they were commanded, took Paul and brought him by the night to Antipatris. This next day, they left the horsemen to go on with him and return to the barracks. Now, this city is about 25 miles from Caesarea. So the foot soldiers only went so far. I think once they reached this city, they realized that they weren't being followed. And they were out of the area where these angry Jews were at. So it would have been safer for Paul than continue on with just the horsemen. And so then that day he enters the city, verse 33. When they came to Caesarea and had delivered the letter to the governor, they also presented Paul to him. And when the governor had read it, he asked what province he was from. And when he understood that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will hear you when your accusers also have come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's praetorium. And so Felix is also, or the commander down in Jerusalem, sends this letter, sends Paul, but he also gathers his accusers and tells them to go out to Caesarea and stand before Felix. And so Felix wants to make sure that Paul fell under his jurisdiction, so we can get an idea of how big his province was. Like I said, he was over Judea, but that would have also included Damascus. That would have included Tarsus, which is that area up where Paul was from, or where he was from. And so his province was pretty good size. Felix reigned from 52 to 59 AD. And if you look at Acts 24:27 again, it says, but after 2 years, Porcius Festus succeeded Felix, and Felix, wanting to do Jesus a favor, left Paul bound. So Paul is here for 2 years. So we know Felix reigned from 52 to 59. This would make this point where Paul comes up to Caesarea about 57 AD. So we kind of get a good timeline of what's going on here. And Paul was here for 2 years. Now, he was kept in Herod's praetorium. Barnes states this: the word used here denotes formally the tent of the Roman praetor. And since that was the place where the justice was administered, it came to be applied to the halls of justice. This had been raised probably by Herod the Great at his palace, or as a place for administering justice. It is probable also that prisons or a place of security would be attached to such place. So this is in a sense, the court, where Felix would stand or sit and have people stand before him, and he would judge the things that are going on. And more than likely, there was some prisons and things attached, a place for Paul to stay and be protected while he was in Caesarea. And so that gets us to the end of chapter 23. Any questions on anything? If not, all right, we will pick up here next week in chapter 24.